Hi, and thanks for watching. Let's look at 4 training approaches that reduce your chances of injury while you're training. Now, of course, this comes from my experience in the internal styles of martial arts. So this is Chen Tai Chi, Bagua, and Xingyi, though I think these ideas can apply to any type of training regime. And so in this video, we'll look at those 4 training approaches. We'll look at some examples from the internal styles of martial art. But before we do that, let's just stop and ask why this is important. And I want to talk about a few different recently published studies in sports medicine. One of them looked at over 11,000 different participants who are participating in high-intensity exercise. And it found the prevalence of injuries was 36%, meaning over 1 in 3 of those people had some kind of injury. It doesn't say whether it was caused or acquired through that activity, but 1 in 3, over 1 in 3. There's a second study, this is quite recent from, I believe, 2022, that was comparing the rates of injury in high-intensity exercise. And it ranged between 4 injuries per 1,000 hours of training up to as high as 9.9 injuries per 1,000 hours of training. That high number, the high end of the injury rate, actually matches fairly closely a third study that found when comparing experienced participants in high-intensity exercise with people who've just begun, that the incidence of injury was 3.77 times higher with people who had been practicing or training for 2 years or more. 3.77 is getting pretty close to 4. What this boils down to is that if you're doing high-intensity training and you're doing that about an hour a week, then after about 2 years, your chances are fairly high of sustaining some kind of injury. I think in general, we're a little too tolerant of our activities causing injury. And so I wanted to look at different techniques that avoid injury or reduce the chances of injury. And so, of course, this comes from, as I mentioned before, the internal styles of martial arts. And one of the sayings that they have is this idea that we want to train the bones and the ligaments over the muscles. If we translate that into a few ideas that are more modern, then here's 4 aspects that tie very closely to this idea of training the bones and the ligaments. First of all, of course, is load-bearing exercises. These are exercises that involve supporting your body weight as you do them. This covers a whole ground of things, of course, anything where you're upright, from tennis to ping pong to pickleball. It does not include non-load-bearing exercises, or it does not include things like swimming or cycling or rowing, things where you're seated or that you're being supported. But anything that supports your weight would be classified as a load-bearing exercise. These are important because they help maintain or enhance bone density. Second, of course, is functional exercises. These are exercises that involve more than just a single muscle group. So instead of ones that just strengthen single simple movements, they involve movements that combine different muscle groups and requires them to be coordinated or require them to be activated in a coordinated manner. Also, what we see in the internal styles of martial arts is a rotational motion. Now, a rotational motion is one that involves not just the muscles and the bones and the ligaments, but will also involve the fascia. And the fascia, of course, is the lining that covers all of the internal structures of the body, and working in coordination with the other parts provides an elastic, coordinated, fluid kind of motion. And this is a type of motion that gets emphasized in the internal styles of martial arts. And then lastly, and quite most distinctively, would be the promotion of the parasympathetic nervous system. from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic. These are the two halves of our nervous system, with the parasympathetic nervous system being the one that promotes rest and recovery. So here we have a training program or a training approach that actually, as you do it, activates and promotes the aspect of ourselves that enhances, or I'll call it enhances, rest and recovery. And so these are the four characteristics that I wanted to highlight that are visible or a fundamental part of the training with internal styles of martial arts. So let's look at an example. Let's look at Chen style Tai Chi. So Chen style Tai Chi. So within Chen style Tai Chi, we see all of these aspects, of course. There's the load bearing, which is especially with the Chen style Tai Chi, very apparent with this weight shift from one side, always alternating to the other. So all of the movements has this continual shift of weight. So the weight is being supported on one side and then shifts over to get supported on the other side. Of course, it's a functional motion that we see, movements that are combining different muscle groups and having them fire in a coordinated fashion. You'll see that it has this rotational motion that happens. The rotational motion happens obviously through the arms and the wrists coming through, but this same motion is also happening through the legs, through this rotation through the body. So as that motion happens into the hip and then coming back out of the hip, we see that rotational motion actually happening through the legs, as well as the arms, as well as through the torso. This engages, of course, the movement through the fascia and allows a smooth and fluid transfer of power coming from one segment of the body, moving through and out to another segment of the body. And of course, it has that promotion of the parasympathetic nervous system. And so this helps to explain a lot of the training techniques that you see common in internal styles, which of course make it contrast from what we are used to expecting in other types of exercise. The lower intensity, the slow movement, the emphasis on relaxation. So let's look at another style of internal martial arts. This is the Xingyi, which is a little more linear, and so worth looking at as well. So a little more snappy in terms of the movements, a little more linear, a little more direct than the Chen style Tai Chi. But still, of course, we have the load bearing, and still, of course, we have the functional motion. It has a fair bit of rotation that's happening, though it does have an appearance of being much more direct. It's much more similar to external styles of martial art. However, even with the more direct motions, we still see this rotational motion that happens, especially in movements such as this one, coming through here. That rotational motion obviously is happening through the forearms. It's also happening through the shoulders, and though it's hard to see with a video such as this, there is actually a rotational motion that happens within the stance that moves through the hips into the ankles and engages the arch of the foot. And of course, central to the training within Xingyi is also this sense of relaxation and coordination that reduces strain and reduces effort. So in other words, trying to find ways to create effective movement without increasing the sympathetic nervous system response. So these 4 characteristics, they're things that you can evaluate and try and enhance in your own training program. And I think this will be helpful for you in terms, or I hope it will be helpful for you in terms, of course, in terms of injury prevention. And of course, if you want to just start learning an internal style of martial art, I think that's a good idea. I hope this information is helpful for you. Keep training, keep learning, and take care.